Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Encore episode of the Psychology Talk podcast. Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Hoye. The Psychology Talk podcast is a unique conversation about psychology from around the globe. We bring you ideas from mental health practitioners and experts to keep you informed about the latest issues and trends. Topics include developments and research in psychotherapy and social sciences, hypnosis and mind-body treatments, meditation and spirituality, and new treatment modalities. And while you're listening, please take a moment to subscribe and give us a review at your favorite streaming site. It helps us to grow and further reach people with quality programming. And now, here's the episode. Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. Today my guest is Jonathan Sabbagh. Jonathan is the CEO of Journey Clinical. Journey Clinical is a telehealth platform specializing in remote and in-person ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. It focuses on the needs of the psychotherapist by helping approved psychotherapists integrate ketamine-assisted psychotherapy into their practices. They're also building out a platform to facilitate the delivery of customized treatments of all modalities to their patients. Jonathan will be telling us about his journey from the world of finance to the world of mental health and psychedelically assisted psychotherapy. This sounds like a very interesting trip, and I look forward to the conversation. Jonathan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Nice to see you.
Well, where do we start? That's a lot. You are doing something that's really, I've looked at it. It looks like a really captivating and excellent platform for rolling out as they become approved. A lot of these new therapies, such as ketamine, which is already approved, and just making sure that everything is really about the integration of what these old medicines newly facilitated into psychotherapy can do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely the path we've been taking at Journey Clinical is to support, mass adoption of these treatments. And so that, I think, is the general ethos of what our platform is.
Yeah. Well, you take it away. Tell us,
Sure.
Tell us what you want to about that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, maybe I can start a little bit with my own personal journey and how I got to, doing this work and why it's so meaningful to me and also to my wife, who's my co-founder, and our team. I think we're a very mission-driven company in that way. My personal background is in finance. So I'm actually Swiss. I spent, the first 20 years of my life working in hedge funds and operating various roles. I had a history as an entrepreneur where I built 2 companies from the ground up. But while I was building that first company, I actually experienced what turned out to be a pretty substantial burnout. And in hindsight, when I looked at that and worked through it with therapists, it turned out to be the result of undiagnosed complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Wow.
That led me through a life of really depression, addiction, a lot of medication until about roughly 6 years ago now, I started working with psychedelics, first ayahuasca and a series of, 20 plus traditional ceremonies. And then moving on to working with ketamine assisted psychotherapy for the last 2 years. And that process was extremely transformative to me, very helpful. It helped me get off medication, live a much more normalized life, but it also prompted a career pivot for me. I no longer felt a connection to the work I was doing in my professional life and really felt the need to find something that felt much more purposeful to me. And so I took the difficult decision to quit finance and go back to school to study clinical psychology. And so I went back to the new school actually and, started my path to becoming a clinician. It was actually an interesting journey because as it turns out, I had never finished high school. And so I went straight to working in finance when I was 19 years old. And so I had to pass my GED at the age of 38, which was fun and challenging at the same time. Yeah. And also convince my wife and family that it was a good idea for me to stop making any kind of income and go back to school. And once I did that, I, got into college, and I really, really got taken by the content. I'm a huge nerd. I love studying psychology. And as I was on that path, I had just gotten accepted into the master's program, and I felt that I really needed to integrate my background as an entrepreneur and use that skill set that I had honed for over 20 years to, work with my long-term goal of becoming a clinician. And that's the genesis of how Journey came to be.
Well, you might have seen that there's a bit of a dearth of the understanding of owning and operating even a small business in psychology and counseling and social work schools. So you have to kind of learn those skills somewhere. It sounds like you front loaded those skills in many ways, which is excellent. But you know what? I'm wondering, you mentioned ayahuasca and ketamine. So maybe at some point you of all people might be able to discuss the difference between those two healing modalities or medicines, one plant derived. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. They're very different modalities. Ayahuasca is a more traditional psychedelic, and ketamine is actually a dissociative anesthetic. So they work differently on the brain. Mm-hmm. The also context in which ayahuasca is given and versus ketamine, which is a very medicalized model, versus a very traditional model, ceremonial setting with indigenous people and indigenous traditions also changes the approach. I couldn't quite say if one is better than the other. I've tremendously benefited from both and have a huge amount of respect for people who are from indigenous populations and offer these treatments and bring this amazing knowledge forward and support it today, and took all those risks to deliver them at times in this country. But I also see that the medical model is the ethos in which we exist as a Western world. And so that is also part of delivering these treatments.
Yeah. Well, we had Jeremy Narby on the show last fall, and he discusses in depth that need for combining the two kind of Weltanschauungs, right, or perspectives, epistemologies of the traditional healer and the traditional Western medical model. Do you see that happening, or do you see that as aligned with the vision of Journey Clinic?
Absolutely. I think that a lot of the setting and the approach to delivering these treatments is definitely being incorporated in the context of, ketamine assisted psychotherapy and more Western models, this bringing in music, creating a setting, that is supportive of these kind of journeys, working through group therapy or group CAP sessions or group, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy sessions is very similar to the way these more traditional medicines are delivered and extremely helpful. The music itself that is used is often used within the same context. So there's a lot of overlap and a lot of learnings from indigenous offerings, and they should be recognized.
Mm-hmm. Well, you said you can't really say which one is better, but what do you think you learned from ayahuasca compared to what has been transformational with ketamine?
When I went to drink ayahuasca for the first time, I was in an extremely vulnerable place in my life where I think I was in a downward spiral. Mm-hmm. And I had come to, probably as many others before me, to a point where this was kind of a last resort and I was willing to try anything. And when I found that medicine, it was a revelation. It was also extremely difficult as an experience, and at times extremely painful. I personally found that I needed a lot of them in the beginning. I actually did something like 7 ceremonies in 2 weeks. And it took a long time. It was a 5-year process of working through these medicines and sitting there with them regularly and going back and working to integrate them. And I'm just extremely grateful. It was, it broke me and built me up again.
Wow. Okay. Okay. And so you simultaneously, you were working to kind of integrate the material, the things that you were working on with the ayahuasca. Did you work with a shaman in South America, or?
I worked here in the US with ayahuasca. Yeah. But I think one thing I would add is that I really started doing integration work more actively when I started working with ketamine with my psychiatrist here in New York, and who's an extremely experienced person. And when we started to work on the integration bit of what I was going through in these ceremonies, as well as starting to do some ketamine work together, I found a real benefit to that, I have to say, to start to work on integrating this experience, on understanding what was going on with me. That was when I was diagnosed with PTSD. And that was a huge relief, like understanding that I'm actually traumatized. And that's why my defenses were so strong, and showing up in that context in such a sometimes even a violent manner. And working through that with someone who helped me understand what was going on and helped me bring my own attention to these experiences and process them and open my heart to myself and be kinder, I think was something that I'm extremely grateful for. I still work on today. Wow.
Okay. So it's a very deep and moving experience for you, and really getting to the heart of psychotherapy, really. I mean, being able to, a lot of the information now in neuroscience and cognitive psychology or mentalization is it one of the main elements that helps people is, we used to call it insight, but now it's considered more metacognition, being able to see yourself, to see your thoughts just as thoughts, or see your experiences as an experience that isn't recurring.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it is interesting when you're in the psychedelic state, or when you're having a psychedelic experience, that often these thoughts are really sort of materialized in front of you and you're living through them. And the opportunity is to sit with them. I think that ayahuasca is an extremely immersive and powerful experience. So I don't think it's for everybody either, I have to say. But, it can be very challenging to sit with and experience that and look at yourself and actually be able to keep it inward and be quiet and hold those experiences, which I wasn't always capable of doing. And I think that was one thing that helped me with working with ketamine, was that I was able to, and this was me. And again, it's important to say that I don't think that one's better than the other. I just think things are different. And when I was working with ketamine, it allowed me, probably also because I was working with a psychiatrist, with me, to sit with those emotions in a little bit of a cooler way and work through them. So that was an interesting contrast. And I also had the opportunity to work with other medicines. I worked with psilocybin and MDMA together once. That was extremely amazing to work on a heart-opening way. So I've been really privileged to work with a lot of these medicines in very, very good context with people who are highly experienced at holding space and delivering them. And they've changed my life.
Wow. Okay. It's that space holding that is the main thing, I think.
I think so. I think it's space holding, and I think that it is the integration work that is essential to really take the insights you gain in this context and, support long-term behavioral change.
Wow. Yeah. So a lot of like deep, tectonic shifts or paradigm shifts must have been going on for you during this experience. Like you must have like started to like say, oh, wow, this is why I do this, or, oh, wow, I don't have to do that, or oh, wow, I can have a heart-oriented approach to the universe and people.
Yeah, I mean, the beginning is, at least my experience for me, was very involved and very self-centered. And then as you work through, as you said, recognizing that these things are thoughts, and that experience is probably quite general to a certain extent to everybody. Mm-hmm. Although our past and our personal experiences are very personal, when you get to that acceptance that of the general nature of our condition, I think that allows for feeling a sense of oneness with everybody in the world. And in those contexts, I suppose that is what you feel when you go through an ego death.
So, but this really affords you like it affords you literally a bird's eye view and an immersive view into how these medicines work. And it very much so must have influenced the way you looked at your training, your psychological training at the new school as you're moving towards licensure and so what a profound perspective to having been going through this healing process while with these modalities that probably will soon be FDA approved, and being able to set up this clinic. Like, I wonder what it was like for you to go to school. Like many people go to school learning to work, as we say, outside in, right? And then like most trainings now in graduate programs, they don't tend to look at like the idea of like huge tectonic shifts for people's minds.
Right.
I mean, however, you went right, like another native Swiss person, Carl Jung, you kind of like, you kept that side of yourself quite alive in many ways, right?
That's a big comparison. I don't know if I quite live up to that.
Well, I mean, you weren't hanging out with Adler and Papa Freud or anything, I'm sure, but your time will come.
Right.
Tell me a little bit about how you decided, like you went back to school during this healing process and you've been essentially working towards becoming a clinician. Mm-hmm. Did you enter into private practice before you started working as a CEO of Journey, or did you just go, I want to set this up and this is going to take a lot more of a managerial kind of bandwidth, so to speak, of my brain?
Sure. No, I was actually an undergrad. I still am. I just got accepted into the bachelor master's program. Well, a year ago, I got accepted into the master's program. So
at new school?
At the new school. Yeah.
Okay.
And, I started, so I wasn't close to becoming a licensed clinician yet. I actually was hoping to go on a PhD track because I enjoy research as well. Mm-hmm. And I started to work on this company with my wife, Miriam, who herself has her own healing journey, but she's also got a pretty deep business background. And, building a company from the ground up and running it, that is something I don't think that's something that you can do part-time, to be honest. As I was in school, I was actually an undergrad. I had to, because I had
Which surprises me because you know so much of this stuff. I mean, yeah.
Right, right. But I also...
You do learn a lot in a good undergrad psych program. You do.
You do. I actually really enjoyed being a student. It's something I deeply enjoy, actually, being in school and having the privilege of being with people who are younger than me and who keep you fresh. That's fantastic.
Before I went back, I was an actor and a musician and an artist before I did this. I went back after years of saying I'd never go back to school. I ate my words. I hope I don't have to eat any other words down my karmic path. But this is good word eating, I guess. And I went to Hunter College, which has a great psych program, which is similar. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, for my prereqs. So cool. Cool.
Yeah. And I really love it. I miss it, actually. I miss being in school. And I had been accepted in the bachelor master's program at the New School. So I was on my way to licensure. My hope was and still is to get a PhD in clinical psychology. I enjoy research, and so I'd like to do more of it. But we started to build this business with my wife, who herself has her own healing journey and a really deep business background. And, as we launched it and we raised capital and we started to develop it, it was very apparent that it's impossible to do two things well.
Oh yeah.
And so it was, pretty immediate that I had to take a leave of absence with school. And so the New School was really super supportive of it. I have a deep relationship with the New School. They've been amazing. We're actually doing a conference with them. I think it's in May or April, alongside, Ingmar Gorman from Fluence, and, Osmind and Matt Baggett from Tactogen. So we've got a whole group and we're doing a whole conference on psychedelics with the New School. So, our offices, oddly enough, Journey Clinical's offices are in the building, where my lab at the New School, where Professor Todman's lab is. So we're in the same building. So it's very funny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's convenient. It works out.
Yeah. It's great.
That's good.
Yeah. So that was it. But you have to, you can't do two things well at the same time. You have to do one thing and do it well.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Yeah. And very wise decision there. And I'm sure that part of your mind that is connected to having been an entrepreneur, you looked at the landscape of what you would have to do if you were juggling both the academic and the CEO world. That's kind of difficult. Yeah. But so it seems like there's been a profound interest in Journey Clinical from the side of investors. Yeah.
We did a good job at executing well, at coming up with an innovative solution to bring these treatments to both therapists and patients in a sound way and responsible way and a scalable manner. And so we were able to raise capital quite quickly last year.
Yeah. Excellent. Good. Well, tell me the difference about what do most ketamine assisted therapy platforms, or are there a lot? Because from my understanding is many people have kind of jumped on the bandwagon, anesthesiologists, a lot of them, some psychiatrists, to open up clinics with very little of the integration or the psychotherapy involved. In Chicago, and there's a number of places where you can get an IV drip and you might be okay, but the follow through, the follow up with it is kind of non-existent. I'm just curious, what your model looks like and how does it support psychotherapists?
Yeah. I think what we can do is, just before I explain to you what we do, just, identify the two models that exist for ketamine assisted or ketamine therapy in general, the use of ketamine. Essentially, there is the medical model, which is what you're referring to, where a lot of anesthesiologists or emergency room doctors essentially give IV infusions to people who suffer usually from depression or anxiety. Some treat bipolar depression, neuropathic pain, OCD. There's a variety of conditions that are listed on a lot of these websites. And that was what emerged in the US, at least, originally. So what you're referring to. And so that model essentially is an IV drip of ketamine. I think it's about 0.5 milligrams per kilogram. And they're focused on the neurological impacts of ketamine on the brain. And what that is effectively is that, as you well know, there's the glutamate theory of depression, where if you have poor regulation of glutamate in the central nervous system, that is a physiological cause of depression. The other thing is that people who are, depressed, traumatized, or stressed have lower levels of neuroplasticity because they're ruminating on thoughts. And so what ketamine's very good at doing is increasing neuroplasticity, but it's also an antagonist to the NMDA receptors, which are the receptors for the neurotransmitter glutamate. And so because it's antagonist to the neuroreceptor, the NMDA neuroreceptor, it essentially, operates as a lock and causes reabsorption of the neurotransmitter glutamate, which helps it regulate in the central nervous system. And so that's true. And a lot of the studies actually that you see on efficacy of ketamine are based mostly on IV infusions. And if you look at the studies of efficacy of IV infusions, if you take a treatment-resistant population, when they took a treatment-resistant population and gave them ketamine within 24 hours of that infusion, I think it's something like 50 or 60% became respondent. And if you remove the outliers, you were reaching north of 70%. And that lasted for 3 months. So it's a very efficacious treatment. It's also used quite commonly in ERs to treat people with suicidality. They'll give them an IM injection of, IM is intramuscular injection of ketamine. And that's quite common. So that's the medical model. The medical model is really concerning itself with the it's a medical intervention. They don't really quite concern themselves with the dissociative aspects of ketamine, or if you'd like to call them like the more psychedelic, effects of ketamine. And so you're correct. In that context, there isn't any kind of psychotherapy, although, to the credit of many clinics and some who are doing it very responsibly. And, there are people here in New York called Ember Health who have been very responsible at doing that, and who have worked with, psychotherapists to come and give people psychotherapy during the infusion or around it. And so there are people recognizing that more and more. And the reason is, some patients were sitting in an IV infusion experiencing an ego death and didn't quite know what to do with it. But that doesn't take away from the efficacy of the treatment itself for the purpose that they were looking to achieve. Yeah. Right. The other model is ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And what that is essentially is working with the ketamine in the context of a therapeutic model. So you're looking much closer here to what MAPS is doing with MDMA assisted psychotherapy, for example, where the format would be having a preparation session where the patient will be, first of all, explained what is going to happen, how is it going to work, what's not going to happen. You'd be actually quite surprised how much of the preparation work is working through the transference that we start to build to these kinds of medicines. It's a tremendous part of this treatment. It's a tremendous dynamic that exists, people developing transference and an expectation to what these medicines or these experiences should be like. So a lot of the work of preparation is actually helping them maybe lower their expectations so that they can sit with the experience itself. The dosing session, which we can go through, where they, administer the ketamine and sit with or the patient self-administers, in our case, the ketamine, and sits with the therapist. And then the integration work, which really is where you take these insights and work to turn them into long-term behavioral change.
Well, this is self-administered, you said? How so?
Well, we'll work. Maybe I'll walk you through that. There are a variety of models. So some of them is administered by a psychiatrist, for example. They could have intramuscular injections. And so they're doing it in the office with a psychiatrist who is either giving them therapy, or with an MD who's administering it, and a psychologist who's giving them therapy. But there are also versions like ours where the patient self-administers. And I'll walk you through that. It's simply the nature of our model.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe to dive into what we're doing at Journey Clinical. So Journey Clinical's mission is to essentially support the mainstream adoption of psychedelic assisted psychotherapy. And when we considered what was the best path to delivering these medicines safely and efficaciously to patients, it was through licensed mental health professionals. That's what we landed on. And it's similar as an ethos that what MAPS has landed on, where, they feel like they want to train, I think it's 30,000 therapists by 2030 to help them deliver MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. And the reason why is because licensed mental health professionals are already embedded in local populations, and they have a relationship with the patient population. The other reason why it is the best path is because of the container they support, and essentially the therapeutic alliance that is developed between a therapist and their patient is, in our view, the best way to deliver these treatments. And so what we feel is that these treatments should be available to licensed mental health professionals as an adjunct to therapy, EMDR, CBT, psychedelics on an as-needed basis. And so we started to consider what was the main barrier to entry to offering these treatments in their practice. And what we found by surveying more than 600 practitioners was that building and maintaining a relationship with a prescribing physician is really the hardest things to do. Okay. They're hard to find, they're hard to maintain, and so they mostly refer out. And when they do have these relationships, well, the cost of the hourly rate of prescribers or doctors actually puts a lot of pressure on the treatment itself, on the price of the treatment itself for the patient, and limits the ability for the psychotherapist to generate income for themselves. And so what we essentially do at Journey is set them up with everything they need to incorporate ketamine-assisted psychotherapy in their practice. And that starts with a telehealth platform that supports a collaborative care model where we take on all of the medical aspect of CAP. So that is eligibility, prescriptions, and outcome monitoring. And our member psychotherapists take on the psychotherapy portion. And practically how it works is that they, become members of Journey Clinical. They refer their patients to us, or we are also a source of referral. We'll see them for a full hour intake. The patient will, if eligible, receive a prescription for sublingual ketamine, which we'll have delivered to their home. The patient will take that ketamine in a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy session with their therapist. They'll come back for a dose adjustment, and we'll see that patient regularly, generally about 4 times a year, for follow-up consultations. What we'll also do is that we'll become the in-house doctor for these psychotherapists, where we're there for them 24/7 with a minimum of 24-hour response rate to make sure that there's anything that they need, or, things do come up. Patients will take the ketamine outside of the context of the treatments and lie about it. But we've seen some more acute situations. And because of the container that we support between our medical staff and the psychotherapist, we're able to sort of address these more serious conditions. And actually, our medical staff is highly trained. Our medical director, Kyle Lapidus, is an MD PhD from Albert Einstein, who oversaw our MAP site. Our lead clinician, Bridget Gordon, is a psychiatric nurse practitioner who teaches at Columbia, but who's also MAPS's site practitioner here in New York. And we've developed, we've got a lot of other people in our medical staff that are highly trained. And we have actually developed our own internal training to help them work with these medicines as well and support the therapists.
So so this is taking place, I think you mentioned in an earlier conversation, it's on your website. This is taking place in 2 or 3 states, right? Colorado, New York, and that's it? Colorado and New York?
No, we've expanded. So we're in New York, Colorado, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and California right now.
Okay. So is that specifically because of the licensure issues or medical issues? Like, is it the delivery, because you're delivering sublingual ketamine? Is that the issue? Like, other states you haven't been able to open up in other states, or is it just the rollout process?
It's just a rollout process. So very much like you, like any psychotherapist, getting licensure is a state-by-state process. And so, every time you open a new state, you have to get a medical license and we have to develop a new organization there and hire staff who is licensed there. So it's really simply it's an administrative task.
Here's an interesting thing that's gone on. I mean, the Counseling Association, the ACA, the American Counseling Association, I think the social workers as well. And I think this started with PsyPact, which is something that the American Psychological, are you aware of that? So like if the state is in network with Psypact, and if I were to formally fill out my paperwork with Psypact, which is a lot of hassle, I haven't quite done that yet, I could work across for a certain number of sessions and certain number of sessions in person in the state with the person. Mm-hmm. Would somebody who's involved with Psypact be eligible, say, if California was part of that, which I don't think it is yet, but let's say New York, if New York is part of Psypact, would you be able to deliver services from Illinois and be part of that? Or is that still something you haven't quite worked out?
Great question. We've got a number of our members who are part of Psypact, and there is a equivalent for medical licenses called compact states. And so Colorado is a compact state. So we now have a compact state in our licenses. So we are definitely going down that path to expanding, Excellent. Which is about 30 states.
Good. Now, getting back to the treatment modality, did I hear correctly that it's 4 sessions with a therapist, or is it 4 sessions with the medical, like per year with the...
It's with so the minimum is 4 medical sessions or 4 clinical consultations with our medical staff. Okay. The reason why and this is at a minimum, we have a variety of protocols that we support, so we have in-person CAP, we can support remote CAP, we can support group CAP. So we've got, a variety of modalities, and we're always trying to come up with more as we develop it. But what we found is that the best way to mitigate negative outcomes is to have a robust care management system. Right. And to do that, it requires, aside from, administering measures at intake and on a regular basis, frequent patient interactions. So very similar to what a hospital would do, for example. And so we've got a very robust medical protocol that allows us to make sure that the patient is okay, that the therapist is still something that is reasonable. The treatment is something that's still reasonable for the patient to have and to continue, or if they should stop. And we're also making sure that the therapy is going well. We'll ask them, how's everything going? So, these are touch points and escalation mechanisms that we have in place that allow us to support quality care for our patients.
Okay, excellent. I guess the other question I would have is basically ongoing psychotherapy as needed, right? And is the sublingual ketamine ingested a little bit before the therapy starts, or how does that happen?
No, the patients tend to take it at the beginning of the therapy session.
Okay. And how long for the sublingual effects of the ketamine to kick in?
They take about 20 minutes. 20
minutes. So usually about, and if it's an hour-long session,
it's about 2.5 hours.
Okay, 2.5 hours. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right. It's a bit like I use hypnosis, and depending on the issue that I'm working on, even though I can hear people in Division 30 screaming at me at their iPhone right now if I say depth of trance. But if I want to work with somebody who's very hypnotizable or decently hypnotizable, and I want to work on something more profoundly with them, that might take an hour and a half. So very similar kind of adjusting and letting the setting kind of settle in.
Right. Yeah. And you also want to make sure that the patient is fully recovered before they get out and get up and go on about, so that they don't hurt themselves. So, those are also considerations to make sure. Similar
precautions with hypnosis as well. Or EMDR or things like that.
Exactly. And I want to make sure to be clear that what we do at Journey is take on all of the medical aspect. That also means that the psychotherapist is not responsible for, prescribing, for diagnosing, for deciding on the treatment plan or the dosage or the frequency. This is all done by our medical staff. And so that is essentially to make sure that the psychotherapists remain within the scope of their license. We don't even have them take blood pressure. We have the patient self-administer the blood pressure cuffs. So is the therapy delivered with teletherapy, or is that usually the medical interview is teletherapy and then inpatient therapy is what takes place, or is it a combination of things? So the clinical consultations with the medical staff are all telehealth consultations. However, the psychotherapy sessions can be in person or remotely. They're both.
Okay. Wow. Okay. This sounds like an extraordinary platform.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
No, I really, yeah.
Well, thank you. I think it's worth also just explaining the rest of our platform. So that's the medical side. The other part of it.
Oh, wait.
There is more indeed. Yes, absolutely. Yes. So the other part of it is an online portal that offers all the rest of the resources that our therapists need. And that includes educational resources. So Fluence, Igmar's company, who's also on our board, has developed, online education modules. There's about 22 modules that work through what is ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. We have, peer consultation groups. We have a variety of talks. We're working through a number of community offerings that will support them in their practice. We help them with a lot of the library of resources, including legal documents. And we have a very easy way for them to sort of enter their sessions and make sure that, it's easy to track. So it's really a full service turnkey solution for them to incorporate CAP in their practice.
Wow. Okay. Wow. This is, it sounds really exciting. I wish you were here in Illinois and I could.
We will be.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
soon,
just
soon enough.
You let me know, Jonathan.
You got it.
Now, the other thing is, I assume you're waiting for the fast track of MDMA and psilocybin to be finished with USOMA, with Johns Hopkins, through the Hefter Institute and whatnot. Will you be incorporating those types of therapies as well?
Absolutely.
Okay. Wow.
Our plan is 100% to incorporate all of psychedelic therapies in our model. That will impact, the REMs are very much going to impact how that's going to look. But we're definitely looking to incorporate them.
Okay. And do you see interests in other sectors to kind of like mimic your model in some way, shape, or form, or parts of it? Because it sounds like you really have thought this out.
Yeah, we have. It takes a lot of time and effort to do it. I think it's inevitable that when you have a model that works, people will replicate it.
Right.
And that's fine. I think that it's about keeping your head down, executing well, and building a robust business that will support as many people as we can.
Yeah, ultimately, it sounds like what you're striving for isn't a lot of bells and whistles and excitement and flashiness, but rather the human connection, and really supporting the psychotherapists with strong, robust medical assistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's medical assistance and also a variety of tools that make it very easy for them to incorporate this in their practice. And it's also, I think the community aspect that we've developed and that we're developing is substantial. It really helps them, sort of like, people don't often know how lonely it can be to be a therapist. It's a lonely job. Often these people are, self-employed, right? Even if they do work with a group practice, especially after COVID, people are often working remotely. And so having access to a community of peers who know how this work goes and being able to communicate with them and developing those relationships. And that's really something that we've worked on supporting, very much. And, I think really helps, get them along and want to do this more.
Well, community is really, I think, the key to human functioning in a lot of ways. Strong, healthy community connections, and boundaries as well. But you mentioned community. Are there any plans for you to have community outreach in the areas where you have clinicians? Like, is that an aspect of it, to inform people? Because these are very effective therapies, rolled out properly. And there are a lot of underserved communities that could be helped by them. There are lots of populations that are, the walking wounded, the invisible complex PTSD folks, or panic disorder folks, right now we have, what I would say is probably the worst numbers I've seen for anxiety, the highest numbers, right? At least probably over 25% now because of the pandemic and other issues. People need help.
Yeah.
People really need help. So I think, anyway, getting back to my question, do you think that Journey Clinical will start to actually be more community based within the areas where clinicians are living?
Yeah, I think we will. And so there's a few things. First of all, so yes, we're going to be doing, in-person meetups and having people being able to connect together. So that's something we're working on doing. Mm-hmm. I think I want to go to your point about, people who are underserved. I think the therapists are the number one people who are underserved. Like therapist burnout is a real thing. And, feeling burnt out.
Of course, as a therapist, I always think about other people, right?
Right.
So, but you are right. You absolutely are right. Yeah.
People don't think about this. Therapist burnout is a big deal, and working with patients who are not progressing and who are feeling stuck, is something that can really lead to burnout. And in the amount of, as you correctly pointed out, in the crisis that we're living right now, we've got a lot of people who have got a lot of work. There's a huge amount of demand and they're burning out. And so we see something that I think is really rewarding in our work is seeing people saying, well, wow, this really got my patient unstuck. And it got them through something that wasn't, progressing, and they feel reinvigorated by incorporating this work. So I think that's a really, really, really gratifying thing to see for us. And then, absolutely, we want to work through populations that, need access to these treatments. Our whole plan, and we're very cheap, we try to keep the pricing down as much as we can, is to increase accessibility. We do work with sliding scales. And, even again, going back to the therapists, therapists in minority populations who populations who can't afford therapy themselves are also unable to, get the training and pay for these treatments. So these are also populations that need to be supported. So I think, that's very much the plan. Our plan is accessibility and enabling the most people to get these treatments, at least the people who need it.
Okay. Excellent. Well, that's wonderful. You did mention transference towards the medication, which that's a cool idea. I like that. That's usually transference. Yes, the patient thinks of me as X person in their past, but in this case, it's expectancies. And this is something that happens if you offer things. If you offer hypnosis to people, they might think that they will just be that they will somehow have some extreme sort of CGI experience. They may or may not, depending on their capacities for certain cognitive abilities that hypnosis taps into, such as visualization. And also just the general hypnotizability. But many people can be let down, or they can say, this works really well here, that you made an MP3 for me, Dr. Hoye, and I just it wasn't the same because the expectancies were so high and it was so wonderful the first time that after that. So is that kind of what you're talking about that with the medications as well? Yeah.
Yeah. That's such a good example and so true. We all have transferences everywhere, right? And transference is kind of cool. But it's one of the great things of therapy, transference, using transference to, take a role and repair attachment.
But the other thing is in the therapy, you're supposed to break the fourth wall and say,
right.
Okay, so like we're sitting here in this room. Why are you behaving this way? Why am I feeling this way about you?
Right.
Well, let's explore this. And that's,
But here you have a very powerful medicine that's given to someone and who's often vulnerable or in very specific context. And the expectation here is, that they're going to heal. And so, I've experienced it myself, transference the medicine actually in ayahuasca. And, sometimes it helps, but sometimes it can be, something that's not so positive really. And, expecting that I should have this kind of experience. And this is what I should be doing. And this is how this should unfold. And then feeling like I'm a failure because I haven't been able to achieve the state that I was looking to achieve. And so, people ask for, this leads, for example, for some people to ask for higher doses or continued treatment when in fact, working with the experience itself and essentially managing expectations to be able to sit with actually what's unfolding in that context is where often the healing lies. And I think that's where a quality psychotherapist who's working with a patient to use these medicines responsibly and structure that context and give them a little bit of a different perspective to what's going on. I've seen and spoken to people in various settings who felt that they weren't able to achieve what someone was telling them their experience should be like. And I don't think that the people who said that to them were ill intentions, but, mostly misguided. And, these are people who are sitting there feeling ashamed and feeling like failures because they weren't able to, heal or get better or, have an ego death or whatever they were looking to achieve. And so, that's a difficult position to be in. And that's transference to the medicine. There's transference to then, maybe I should take more. And so there's a mystical ability to this medicine to come here and cure me. There's also I was just reminded of the idea of the trauma triad, right? Where someone goes into a victim role and they look for a rescuer, or there's the perpetrator. So you're kind of looking for a hero, and in this case, it may or may not. Some people find it in cannabis use, right? But in this case, it may not meet their expectations, and they could turn on it. Yeah, right. So, but also maybe just to add to that is that the important part here is that you're the hero, and so reminding yourself that the hero is you and not the medicine is really what is well.
Those are words. you have done your therapy. No, getting others to do that. Getting others to do that is sometimes very tricky.
But there is a tendency to sort of mystical abilities to medicines where they are an entity almost, and they are, and I think it can help honestly in certain contexts, but bringing it back to you being the hero in that context helps, and that's what MAPS and I think Compass and all these other treatments are doing is, essentially having you connect with your inner healer. And I think that the work with the inner healer and connecting with that part of yourself and bringing it back to working with your inner healer and sitting with that. And that is the way to sort of really leverage these medicines, I think, at their very best.
Yeah. Well, excellent. On that note, is there anything else you'd like to add that I haven't brought up or we haven't brought up yet? Is there anything about Journey Clinical or your own experience?
I think the only thing I can add is that I'm so grateful for doing this work with such a wonderful population. We're working with more than 100 people and many, many patients. And every day we get to collaborate with people who bring their own perspective on how to incorporate these treatments and all the diversity and the conscientious work and the passion that we see in the field is just really inspiring. And I'm really looking forward to growing our network and just keeping our collaborations with them and developing this community of people. And I'm just grateful for that.
Excellent. Well, Jonathan Sabbagh, it was a pleasure talking to you. I wish you Likewise. All the best and everyone at Journey Clinical, especially your clinicians. And how can people find you?
So they can go on our website, journeyclinical.com. They can find us on Facebook or on our Journey Clinical page, on our Instagram, on LinkedIn, also Journey Clinical. So we're on social media and on the web.
Okay. And on Instagram, you said, yeah. Okay, good. Well, excellent. All the best. And please come back sometime.
Sure. Anytime. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. Did you know you can find us on the web all over the place? Well, maybe not all over the place, but you can find us on Instagram, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us at Spreaker, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, loads of places. Please look for us, and if you can, subscribe, like us, leave us a review, send us a comment, a criticism. Hey, we like to hear a lot from people. Go ahead, talk to us. That's why we're here. By the way, this is just a reminder to let you know that all of the material here is for entertainment and informative purposes only. If you do need a therapist or a mental health professional, please seek one out. Music is provided by the band Serenati.